The red sun of Kepler 442b cast long shadows across the mining colony as Sarah Chen finished her shift deep in the crystal caves. The human settlement had been on this distant world for only 3 years, but they had already learned to work around the strange blue crystals that grew everywhere. These crystals were beautiful, but they were also dangerous. One wrong move with the mining equipment could cause a cave-in. Sarah wiped sweat from her forehead and looked at her watch. Her daughter Emma would be waiting for her at home. Emma was only 8 years old, and Sarah wanted to read her a bedtime story. The thought made Sarah smile as she packed up her tools. That was when the ground shook. The cave wall cracked with a sound like thunder. Sarah looked up just as tons of rock and crystal came crashing down. She had no time to run. The last thing she thought about was Emma's face. High above the mining tunnels, beings made of living crystal watched through the rock itself. They had been watching the humans for months, trying to understand these strange new creatures who had come to their world. The Etherni had lived on this planet for over 2 million years. They were immortal. They had never seen death before. When Sarah Chen's life ended in that cave, every Etherni on the planet felt it happen. It was like watching a bright light suddenly go out. They did not understand what they had just witnessed. Elder Luminara was the first to speak. Her crystal body glowed with soft blue light as she communicated with the others through pure thought. What happened to the small human? Why did her energy pattern stop? I do not know, replied Crystallis, whose form shimmered like a rainbow. Her biological functions have ceased completely. Is this some kind of malfunction? The Etherni moved through solid rock as easily as humans move through air. Within minutes, dozens of them had gathered around Sarah's body in the collapsed cave. They had never seen anything like this before. The human was perfectly formed, but something vital was missing. The spark that made her alive was gone. Above ground, the human colony was in chaos. Search teams with heavy equipment worked through the night to reach Sarah. When they finally pulled her body from the wreckage, many of the humans began to cry. The Etherni watched this behavior with growing confusion. Colony leader James Park stood before Sarah's body with tears in his eyes. She was one of our best, he said to the crowd. She came here to build a better future for her daughter. She died doing the work she believed in. The Etherni did not understand these words. How could something that was broken be called best? How could the humans speak of building a future when they clearly could not even maintain their own existence? That night, the Etherni held their first council meeting about humans in 1,000 years. They gathered in the great crystal chamber deep in the planet's core. Hundreds of immortal beings debated what they had witnessed. The humans are defective, declared ancient Pyrian, whose crystal form was so old it had turned black. They cannot maintain basic biological stability. We should help them fix this problem. But Elder Zephyros, who was younger at only 800,000 years old, was not so sure. I have been watching them closely. They seem to know about this malfunction. They act as if they expect it to happen. That is impossible, said Luminara. No intelligent species would accept such a terrible flaw. Zephyros glowed brighter as he shared his observations. Watch their behavior. They measure their activities in small time periods. They speak often of deadlines and limited time. They seem to believe their existence will end. The council was silent. The idea was too strange to accept. The Etherni had always existed and always would. Time meant nothing to them. They could spend a century thinking about a single problem, or 1,000 years perfecting a piece of art. The concept of limited existence was alien to their understanding. 3 days later, the humans held something they called a funeral for Sarah Chen. The Etherni watched invisibly as the humans gathered around a wooden box. Inside the box was Sarah's body, dressed in clean clothes and surrounded by flowers. Emma Chen, Sarah's daughter, stood at the front of the crowd. Her small hand held a piece of paper with writing on it. With a shaky voice, she began to read. My mom was the bravest person I knew. She came to this planet so I could have a better life. She taught me to be strong and to help other people. Even though she is gone, I will remember everything she taught me. I will try to be brave like her. The humans began to put dirt over the wooden box. Many of them were crying, but they also smiled when they talked about Sarah. They shared stories about her kindness, her jokes, her dreams for the future. It was the strangest behavior the Etherni had ever seen. After the ceremony, Elder Luminara materialized in front of Colony Leader Park. Her crystal form sparkled in the afternoon sunlight. Park jumped back in surprise but quickly recovered. The humans had known the Etherni were on this planet, but this was their first direct contact. "We are sorry to startle you," Luminara said, her voice like wind chimes. "We wish to understand what happened to your broken human." "Broken?" Park looked confused. "Sarah wasn't broken. She died in an accident. Yes, we observed this malfunction. We can fix this problem for your species. We have advanced technology that can make your biological system stable like ours." Park stared at the beautiful crystal being. "You want to make us immortal?" "Yes. Then your people will not experience these terrible system failures anymore." Park was quiet for a long moment. Then he shook his head. "Thank you for the offer, but we must decline." Luminara's crystal body flashed with bright colors. "You refuse? But why would you choose to remain defective?" "We're not defective," Park said gently. "Death is part of what makes us human. Without it, we wouldn't be who we are." This answer made no sense to Luminara. How could a flaw be considered essential? How could the humans look at their greatest weakness and call it a strength? As the days passed, more Etherni came to observe the human colony. They watched the humans work with desperate urgency on projects they would never live to complete. They saw humans teach their children skills and knowledge, passing wisdom from one generation to the next. They watched humans take risks, make sacrifices, and show incredible courage. Young Etherni like Crystallis began to ask questions that their elders found disturbing. Why do the humans seem more alive than we do? Why do they create so much beauty in such a short time? Why do their temporary connections seem stronger than our eternal bonds? The Etherni had achieved perfection millions of years ago. They had solved every problem, created every possible work of art, and explored every avenue of knowledge. They existed in peaceful stasis, unchanging and eternal. But watching the humans made some of them wonder if perfection was really the goal. As Sarah Chen's daughter Emma grew up in the colony, the Etherni continued to watch. They saw how Emma carried her mother's memory, how it motivated her to work hard and help others. They saw how the loss had made Emma stronger, not weaker. For the first time in their immortal existence, some of the Etherni began to suspect that they might be the ones who were broken. Dr. Marcus Rivera arrived at the colony 6 months after Sarah Chen's death. He was a medical researcher who had volunteered to come to Kepler 442b to study the effects of the planet's environment on human health. Marcus was 55 years old, with gray hair and kind eyes that crinkled when he smiled. He had left behind a comfortable life on Earth to spend his remaining years helping the colonists. Elder Zephyros became fascinated with Marcus from the moment he arrived. The Etherni had been studying humans for months, but Marcus was different. He worked with an intensity that puzzled the immortal beings. While other humans took breaks and enjoyed leisure time, Marcus spent 18 hours a day in his laboratory. "Why does this human push himself so hard?" Zephyros asked his fellow Etherni. "He damages his body by not resting properly." "Perhaps he is malfunctioning," suggested Luminara. "We have observed that humans become unstable as they age." But Zephyros watched more carefully. Marcus wasn't malfunctioning. He was racing against something the Etherni couldn't understand. Every day, Marcus tested new treatments for diseases that affected the colonists. Every night he wrote detailed notes about his research. He was building something that would last long after he was gone. One evening, Zephyros materialized in Marcus's laboratory. The doctor looked up from his microscope without surprise. News of the Etherni's existence had spread through the colony, though few humans had seen them directly. "You're one of them, aren't you?" Marcus said, adjusting his glasses. "The immortal ones. I am Zephyros. I have been observing your work. I do not understand your urgency." Marcus smiled and gestured to the samples on his lab table. "I'm trying to develop better treatments for the respiratory problems some colonists are having. The crystal dust in the air causes inflammation in human lungs. This will take many years to complete," Zephyros said. "Why do you work so frantically?" "You could pace yourself and finish eventually." "Because I don't have many years left," Marcus replied simply. "I'm old by human standards. I might have 10 or 15 good years of research left in me. Maybe 20 if I'm lucky." Zephyros's crystal form dimmed with confusion. "But if you know your biological systems will fail, why not ask us to repair them? We offered to make your species immortal." Marcus set down his microscope and looked directly at the crystal being. "Tell me, Zephyros, what did you do yesterday?" "Yesterday?" The question puzzled the attorney. I meditated on the mathematical properties of quantum crystalline structures, as I have been doing for the past 300 years. And the day before that? The same. What about 100 years ago? Zephyros was quiet for a moment. I was also meditating on quantum crystalline structures. Marcus nodded. What will you do tomorrow? I will continue my meditation. For how long? Until I have achieved perfect understanding. Perhaps another 1,000 years. Marcus leaned back in his chair. I spent yesterday analyzing blood samples and developing new treatment protocols. Today I'm testing those protocols on tissue cultures. Tomorrow I'll be reviewing the results and starting new experiments. Next week I hope to begin trials on volunteer patients. Next month I plan to publish my findings so other researchers can build on my work. But you will not live to see the full results of your research, Zephyros pointed out. No, I won't, Marcus agreed. But Dr. Kim will continue my work when I'm gone. And when she gets old, she'll pass it on to someone younger. That's how humans progress. Each generation builds on what came before. Zephyros processed this information. The Etherni had achieved their current level of knowledge millions of years ago. Since then, they had simply maintained it. They never built on anything because they had endless time to perfect everything individually. Do you fear your biological failure? Zephyros asked. Marcus considered the question. I don't fear death itself. I fear dying before I've accomplished what I came here to do. I fear leaving work unfinished. But that fear drives me to work harder, to make every day count. Over the following months, Zephyros visited Marcus regularly. He watched the human doctor make breakthrough after breakthrough in his research. Marcus's urgency was infectious. He inspired younger researchers to work harder, to think more creatively, to take risks that immortal beings would never consider. Zephyros began to notice other things about human behavior that his people had missed. Humans formed deep friendships quickly because they knew their time together was limited. They celebrated small victories because they understood that nothing was guaranteed. They took bold chances because they had nothing to lose that they wouldn't lose anyway. The Etherni, by contrast, had become cautious over their millions of years. They avoided risks because they had infinite time to lose. They formed shallow relationships because deep emotions seemed unnecessary when you had forever. They rarely celebrated because any achievement could theoretically be improved given enough time. Marcus introduced Zephyros to other aspects of human culture. He showed him photos of his grandchildren on Earth, whom he would never see again. He shared stories about his late wife Maria, who had died of cancer 5 years earlier. He played music that humans had created knowing it would outlast them. This song was written by a human who died 300 years ago, Marcus explained as he played a classical piece. But his music lives on. In a way, part of him is still alive in this melody. Zephyros tried to understand, but the composer's individual consciousness is gone. How can he be alive? His creativity lives on. His impact on the world continues. The people who hear his music are changed by it, and they change others in turn. That's a kind of immortality that's different from yours. As Marcus's research progressed, he began training younger colonists to continue his work. Dr. Sarah Kim, a brilliant woman in her 30s, became his primary student. Marcus spent hours teaching her not just the technical details of his research, but his philosophy of urgency and purpose. Every experiment matters, he told her. Every day in the lab is a gift. We don't have the luxury of infinite time, so we have to make the time we have count. Zephyros watched these training sessions with growing fascination. He had never seen knowledge transfer like this before. Among the Etherni, each individual developed their expertise over thousands of years. There was no urgency to share it because everyone had unlimited time to learn everything themselves. But humans compressed lifetimes of learning into intense periods of teaching and mentorship. They built on each other's discoveries at an incredible pace. In just a few months, Dr. Kim had absorbed decades of Marcus's experience and was already making improvements on his work. 2 years after Marcus's arrival, his health began to decline. The long hours and stress of his urgent research had taken their toll. Zephyros noticed that the human was moving more slowly, breathing harder, and showing signs of the aging process that the Etherni found so disturbing. You are beginning to malfunction, Zephyros observed during one of their evening conversations. I could still repair your biological systems. Marcus smiled weakly from his bed in the medical bay. It's not a malfunction, my friend. It's life completing itself. How can you be content with this failure? Because I've done what I came here to do, Marcus said. Dr. Kim has successfully treated 12 patients with the new respiratory protocols. The research will continue. The knowledge will grow. My part in the story is ending, but the story itself goes on. Zephyros struggled to comprehend this acceptance. But there is still so much you could discover if you had more time. There will always be more to discover, Marcus replied. That's the beauty of it. Humans will still be making new discoveries long after both of us are gone. Well, long after I'm gone. He'll probably still be meditating on those quantum structures. For the first time in his 800,000-year existence, Zephyros laughed. It was a sound like crystal bells ringing in harmony. Marcus died peacefully 3 days later, surrounded by his human colleagues and watched by several invisible Eterni. As his final breath left his body, Zephyros experienced something entirely new. His crystal form dimmed with what he would later learn was grief. At Marcus's funeral, Dr. Kim spoke about her mentor's legacy. Dr. Rivera taught us that time isn't about how much you have, but about what you do with it. He lived more in his final years than many people live in a full lifetime. Zephyros found himself thinking about his own existence for the first time in millennia. What had he accomplished in 800,000 years? What legacy would he leave? What impact had he made on the universe? The questions disturbed him deeply, but they also excited him in a way he had never experienced before. For the first time since his earliest youth, Zephyros felt the strange sensation that humans called urgency. Elena Vasquez arrived on Kepler 442b 18 months after Dr. Rivera's death. She was a grief counselor and philosopher from Earth, who had specifically requested assignment to the colony after reading reports about human Eterni contact. Elena was in her 40s with warm brown eyes and a gentle voice that made people feel safe enough to share their deepest sorrows. What made Elena special was her understanding of loss. She had lost her husband in a transport accident, her parents to old age, and her best friend to illness. Each loss had taught her something about the nature of grief and the meaning of temporary connections. When she learned that an immortal species was struggling to understand human mortality, she knew she had to help. Elena's first encounter with the Eterni came during her 3rd week on the colony. She was sitting in the memorial garden that the colonists had created for Sarah Chen and Dr. Rivera when Zephyros materialized beside her. "You are the one who helps humans process biological failure," he said, his crystal form pulsing with uncertain light. "I help people process grief," Elena corrected gently. "Loss isn't a failure. It's a natural part of existence. But the cessation of consciousness is clearly a malfunction. How can you call it natural?" Elena smiled and gestured to the flowers around them. "Look at these roses, Zephyros. They bloom beautifully for a few weeks, then they wither and die. Are they malfunctioning? That is different. Plants are simple biological systems. Is it different, or is death simply part of the cycle that makes life meaningful?" This was the beginning of what would become daily conversations between Elena and several Eterni who were curious about human mortality. Elena quickly realized that the immortals had never developed concepts that humans took for granted: mourning, remembrance, closure, and the beauty of impermanence. "Tell me about your relationships," Elena asked Zephyros during one of their talks. "Who are you closest to among your people?" Zephyros considered this. "I suppose I interact most frequently with Luminara and Crystallis. We have known each other for several 100,000 years. Have those relationships changed over time? No. We achieved optimal interaction patterns long ago. There is no need for change." Elena found this fascinating and sad. Among humans, relationships are constantly evolving. We grow together, face challenges together, and yes, sometimes we grow apart. The fact that our time together is limited makes us treasure each moment. She told Zephyros about her marriage to David. "We only had 15 years together before the accident, but those 15 years contained lifetimes of growth and discovery. We changed each other in profound ways. The knowledge that our time was precious made every anniversary, every quiet morning, every shared laugh incredibly valuable. But would it not have been better to have more time together? Maybe," Elena admitted. "But if we had forever, would we have treasured each day the same way? Would we have forgiven each other's flaws so quickly? Would we have told each other, 'I love you' every morning like it might be our last chance?" These conversations began to attract other Eterni. Young ones like Crystallis and Resonance came to listen to Elena's stories about human experiences they couldn't comprehend. Even some of the ancient elders, curious despite themselves, would hover invisibly at the edges of these discussions. Elena introduced the Etherni to human mourning rituals. She showed them how humans created memorials to preserve the memory of the dead. She explained how humans wrote letters to deceased loved ones, how they visited graves to feel connected to those they had lost, and how they celebrated birthdays and anniversaries even after death. "This is the memorial we created for Dr. Rivera," Elena said, leading a group of Etherni to a small plaque in the research center. "Every day, Dr. Kim reads his notes and continues his work. In a way, he's still contributing to medical science." Crystallis, whose rainbow form was always shifting colors, seemed particularly moved by this concept. So the human's death was not the end of his influence on the world? Not at all. His research saves lives every week. His teaching methods are being used by other doctors. His kindness inspired dozens of people to be better versions of themselves. Death ended his biological existence, but not his impact. Elena began teaching the Etherni about human concepts of legacy and continuity. She showed them how human parents taught their children not just skills, but values and dreams. She explained how human teachers inspired students who would go on to teach others, creating chains of influence that lasted for generations. "But how do you cope with knowing that your individual consciousness will end?" asked Resonance, whose crystal form hummed with musical tones. "We learn to find meaning in being part of something larger than ourselves," Elena explained. "A parent finds immortality in their children. A teacher lives on in their students. An artist continues to exist in their creations. We become part of the eternal story of life, even if our individual chapter ends." This was a revelation to the Etherni. They had always thought in terms of individual immortality, never considering collective continuity. The idea that temporary beings could create lasting change through their connections to others was completely foreign to them. Elena also taught them about the courage that mortality inspired. She told them about human heroes who had sacrificed their lives to save others, about researchers who had deliberately exposed themselves to diseases to develop cures, about explorers who had taken deadly risks to expand human knowledge. "Would immortal beings make such sacrifices?" she asked. The Etherni were silent. They realized that their immortality had made them cautious. When you have infinite time to lose, you avoid all risks. When your existence is guaranteed, sacrifice becomes meaningless. But the most important lesson Elena taught was about saying goodbye. She introduced the Etherni to the human art of closure, the ability to accept endings and find peace with them. "Humans practice letting go throughout our lives," she explained. "Children say goodbye to their toys when they outgrow them. Students say goodbye to teachers when they graduate. We say goodbye to our youth, to our dreams, to our possibilities. We learn that endings can be beautiful if we face them with acceptance and gratitude." Elena organized a special ceremony to help the Etherni understand this concept. She invited the colonists to share stories about meaningful goodbyes in their lives. Parents talked about watching their children leave home. Retirees spoke about ending careers they had loved. Elderly colonists shared memories of friends who had passed away. "Each goodbye taught us something," Elena explained to the gathered Etherni. "It taught us to value what we have while we have it. It taught us that love doesn't end when physical presence ends. It taught us that being grateful for what was is more important than being angry about what is lost." Some of the younger Etherni began to experiment with these concepts. Crystallis decided to deliberately end an art project she had been working on for 1,000 years, even though it wasn't perfect. She discovered that accepting the piece as complete, with all its flaws, gave her a satisfaction she had never experienced before. Resonance began creating music with definite endings instead of the eternal, looping compositions that Etherni typically made. She found that the approach of an ending made each note more precious, each harmony more meaningful. Even Zephyros began to change. He stopped his meditation on quantum crystalline structures after 300 years and moved on to a new field of study. For the first time in his existence, he experienced the excitement of beginning something new instead of endlessly perfecting something old. But not all Etherni were ready for these lessons. The ancient elders, led by Pyrion, viewed Elena's teachings as dangerous corruption. They had achieved perfect stability over millions of years, and they saw human mortality as a primitive weakness, not a strength. These temporary beings are filling our young ones with destructive ideas, Pyrian declared at a council meeting. They speak of endings as if they were desirable. They praise limitation as if it were a virtue. This madness must stop. Ancient Solaris, whose crystal form was nearly transparent with age, agreed. We have observed human behavior for over a year now. They are chaotic, unpredictable, and unstable. Their brief existence makes them desperate and reckless. We should isolate ourselves from their influence. But the younger Eterni had tasted something they had never experienced before: growth, change, and the excitement of new possibilities. They had learned that perfection might not be the ultimate goal. They had discovered that temporary connections could be deeper than eternal ones. That limited time could create unlimited meaning. The growing divide in Eterni society would soon lead to consequences that neither species could have predicted. Elena's lessons about letting go were about to be tested in ways she never imagined. The crisis began when Zephyros made a decision that shocked both species. After months of learning about human mortality from Elena, he announced to the Eterni Council that he wanted to experience death for himself. You wish to self-destruct? Ancient Pyrian's crystal form flashed with angry red light. This is madness brought on by contamination from the primitive humans. It is not madness, Zephyros replied calmly. It is curiosity about the one experience I have never had. For 800,000 years I have existed without truly living. I want to understand what the humans mean when they say that mortality gives life meaning. The council chamber erupted in chaotic flashes of light as dozens of Eterni tried to communicate at once. Never in their millions of years of existence had one of their kind voluntarily chosen to end their immortality. Luminara stepped forward, her blue glow steady despite her distress. Zephyros, you have been observing the humans too closely. Their mental patterns are affecting your judgment. This is a temporary malfunction that can be corrected. My judgment has never been clearer, Zephyros said. I have watched humans accomplish in decades what we have not achieved in millennia. They create beauty, form deep connections, and find profound meaning precisely because their time is limited. I want to experience existence as they do. Ancient Solaris, her crystal form nearly transparent with age, spoke with the authority of 5 million years. You speak of human achievements, but what have they truly accomplished? They build structures that crumble, create art that fades, and form relationships that end in sorrow. Their entire existence is a series of failures and losses. But those failures and losses teach them to treasure what they have, Zephyros replied. They love more deeply because they know love can be lost. They work more urgently because they know time is precious. They sacrifice for others because they understand that individual existence is less important than collective progress. The debate continued for days. Other young Eterni began to support Zephyros's position. Crystallis announced that she too wanted to experience mortality. Resonance composed a musical piece about the beauty of endings and declared her intention to give her life finite structure. This contamination is spreading, Pyrian declared to the Elder Council. The humans are a virus infecting our people with their primitive obsession with limitation and death. We must remove them from our world before they destroy our civilization. Elena learned about the Eterni civil war from Zephyros during one of their conversations. She was sitting in the memorial garden, watching the sunset paint the crystal formations in brilliant colors, when he materialized beside her with unusual urgency. Elena, I need to warn you. The Elder Council has decided that humans are a dangerous influence on our people. They plan to force your colony to leave Kepler 442b. Elena's heart sank, but she wasn't entirely surprised. She had sensed growing resistance from the older Eterni whenever she tried to share human perspectives on mortality and meaning. How do the younger Eterni feel about this decision? She asked. We oppose it completely. Your people have given us the greatest gift imaginable, the knowledge that existence can have purpose beyond mere continuation. We will not let the elders drive you away. That night, Elena called an emergency meeting of the human colony leadership. She explained the situation to colony leader Park and the other administrators. So we're caught in the middle of an immortal civil war, Park said grimly. What are our options? We could try to negotiate with the elder Eterni, suggested Dr. Kim. Perhaps we can convince them that we're not a threat. Elena shook her head. I don't think that's possible. The elders see our mortality as a fundamental flaw that threatens their perfect order. They can't accept that limitation might be a strength rather than a weakness. The crisis escalated the next morning when ancient Pyrrhion himself appeared in the colony's central square. His massive crystal form towered over the gathered humans, radiating power and authority accumulated over millions of years. "Temporary beings," he announced, his voice like grinding stone. "You have corrupted our young with your primitive concepts of ending and limitation. You will depart this world within 7 of your day cycles, or you will be removed by force." Colony leader Park stepped forward bravely, though Elena could see his hands shaking. "This is our home now. Our people have lived here for over 3 years. We've built a life on this world." "Your life is an illusion," Pyrrhion replied. "You are biological systems in decline, spreading the virus of mortality to beings who had achieved perfect existence. Your temporary nature makes you unable to understand the damage you cause." That was when young Emma Chen, now 11 years old, surprised everyone by walking up to the massive crystal being. "You're wrong," she said in a clear, strong voice. "My mom died in your caves, but that doesn't make her life meaningless. She died trying to build something good for me and for everyone in this colony." Pyrrhion's form flickered with confusion. He had not expected to be challenged by a human child. Emma continued, "Zephyros told me that you've existed for millions of years, but you've never really lived. You've never felt what it's like to love someone so much that losing them breaks your heart. You've never worked on something knowing you might not live to see it finished. You've never had to be brave because you actually had something to lose. Child, you understand nothing of existence beyond your brief biological function," Pyrrhion said, but his voice lacked its earlier certainty. "I understand that my mom's 3 years on this planet mattered more than your millions of years of just existing," Emma replied. "She changed people's lives. She taught me to be strong. She's still making a difference even though she's gone. That's what real immortality looks like." Before Pyrrhion could respond, alarms began blaring throughout the colony. The Etherni elders had begun their attack, using seismic manipulation to destabilize the human structures. Buildings shook and crystal formations erupted from the ground, forcing the colonists to evacuate to emergency shelters. But the younger Etherni fought back. Zephyros, Crystallis, Resonance, and dozens of others used their own powers to protect the human colony. For the first time in their immortal existence, they were willing to risk everything for beings they had known for less than 4 years. The battle raged for hours. Crystal beings who had lived in harmony for millions of years now fought each other with powers that shook the planet's core. The humans watched in awe and terror as immortal forces clashed above their heads. During the chaos, Elena noticed that several colonists were trapped in a collapsed building. Without hesitation, she ran toward the wreckage, knowing that the unstable structure could come down completely at any moment. "Elena, don't," shouted Dr. Kim, but Elena was already climbing through the debris. She found 3 colonists pinned under fallen beams. Working frantically, she began clearing the rubble, calling for help. Other humans joined her, forming a rescue chain to get the trapped people to safety. It was then that a massive crystal spear, thrown by one of the elder Etherni, came crashing down toward the rescue site. Elena looked up and saw death approaching, but instead of running, she threw herself over the injured colonists, shielding them with her own body. The crystal spear never reached them. Zephyros materialized directly in its path, allowing it to pierce through his crystal form. For an immortal being to be destroyed required massive trauma, and the spear did exactly that. Zephyros's form began to crack and dim. "No," Crystallis cried out, rushing to her friend's side. Zephyros looked at Elena and the humans she had protected. His form was failing, light bleeding out through the cracks. "Now I understand," he said, his voice growing faint. "You were willing to die for others. This is what you meant by meaning. This is what makes mortality beautiful." Elena crawled over to the dying Etherni. "Zephyros, I'm so sorry." "Do not be sorry," he whispered. "I chose this. For the first time in 800,000 years, I made a choice that truly mattered. I experienced what it means to sacrifice for something greater than myself. Thank you for teaching me how to say goodbye." Zephyros's light faded completely. The immortal being who had lived for nearly 1,000,000 years died protecting humans he had known for less than 2 years. His death shocked both species into silence. Ancient Pyrrhion stared at the darkened crystal form of Zephyros. For the first time in his existence, he had witnessed the voluntary death of another Etherni. He had seen immortal beings choose to risk everything for temporary creatures they barely knew. But more shocking still was the behavior of the humans. Even facing annihilation, They had risked their lives for each other. Elena had been willing to die for people she could have easily abandoned. The colonists had run toward danger to help their neighbors. Crystalis knelt beside Zephyros's still form, her rainbow colors muted with grief. "He died as he wished to live," she said. "With purpose, with meaning, with love." The battle stopped. Even the elder Eterni were shaken by what they had witnessed. They had expected the humans to flee when faced with immortal power. Instead, they had seen courage that defied all logic, sacrifice that made no sense to immortal minds, and love that was strengthened rather than weakened by its temporary nature. The real war, Elena realized, was not between the humans and the Eterni. It was between two different ways of understanding. The silence that followed Zephyros's death lasted for 3 days. The human colony remained in emergency shelters while the Eterni processed what they had witnessed. For beings who had never experienced loss, the death of one of their own was a shock that reached to the core of their crystalline souls. Elena spent those 3 days sitting beside Zephyros's darkened form. The other humans thought she was mourning, but she was actually waiting. She understood grief better than anyone, and she knew that the Eterni were experiencing it for the first time. They would need guidance through this new and terrible feeling. On the 4th day, ancient Pyrian materialized in the colony square. His massive crystal form was dimmer than before, and the other elder Eterni gathered behind him with unusual uncertainty. For the first time in millions of years, they were dealing with something they had never experienced. "Human Elena," Pyrion said, his voice lacking its earlier commanding tone. "We do not understand what has happened to us. Since Zephyros ceased to exist, we have experienced disturbances in our consciousness patterns." Elena rose from her vigil and faced the ancient being. "You're grieving, Pyrion. You're feeling the pain of loss, and this pain serves no purpose. It interferes with logical thought. How do we make it stop?" "You don't," Elena said gently. "Grief isn't something to be fixed or eliminated. It's something to be experienced and learned from." Ancient Solaris stepped forward, her transparent form flickering like a dying star. "But why does this pain exist? If death causes such disturbance, surely it is proof that mortality is wrong." Elena walked over to where Zephyros's crystal form lay still and dark. "Look at him. Really look. Do you see failure, or do you see the completion of the most meaningful existence any Eterni has ever lived?" The elders gathered around Zephyros's remains. For millions of years, they had seen only one way to exist: eternal, unchanging, perfect. But Zephyros had chosen a different path. In his final moments, he had experienced something they had never known: the joy of sacrifice, the beauty of choosing love over safety, the profound satisfaction of a life completed with purpose. Crystalis approached the elders, her rainbow form shifting with emotions they were only beginning to understand. Zephyros lived more in his final moments than we have in all our eons of existence. He discovered what it means to truly matter. "But he is gone," Pyrion said, struggling with the concept. "His consciousness has ended. How can this be considered success?" Elena smiled sadly. "Come with me. Let me show you how humans understand continuity." She led the Eterni to the colony school, where Emma Chen was teaching younger children about the planet's crystal formations. Emma had grown into a thoughtful young woman, carrying her mother's strength and her own deep understanding of life's precious nature. "Emma is teaching others what my mother taught me," Emma was saying to her students. She learned it from Dr. Rivera, who learned it from his teachers on Earth. Knowledge doesn't die when people die. It passes from one person to another, growing stronger with each generation. Elena turned to the watching Eterni. Zephyros's death wasn't an ending. It was a transformation. His understanding of mortality and meaning will influence every Eterni who knew him. Through you, his wisdom will continue to exist and grow. Over the following weeks, something unprecedented happened in Eterni society. The younger immortals began to change their entire approach to existence. They started setting goals with definite endpoints. They began forming deeper, more meaningful relationships. They created art and music designed to be completed rather than perfected forever. But the most dramatic change was in how they related to time itself. Instead of viewing their immortality as an endless stretch of unchanged existence, they began to think in terms of phases and chapters. They learned to deliberately end projects, relationships, and periods of their lives in order to begin new ones. Resonance composed her first symphony with a definite ending. When it concluded, She felt a satisfaction she had never experienced in her eternal musical loops. The ending makes every note matter more, she told Elena. Without the approaching conclusion, there is no tension, no urgency, no emotional impact. Chrysalis learned to finish her art pieces instead of working on them forever. She discovered that accepting imperfection and calling something complete gave her work a vitality that her endless refinements never could. Even some of the elder Eterni began to change. Ancient Solaris, moved by Zephyros's sacrifice, made a shocking announcement to the council. "I have existed for 5 million years," she said, her ancient form glowing with new purpose. "I have achieved everything I set out to achieve. I have learned everything there is to learn in my areas of study. I think it is time for me to choose an ending." The council was stunned. But Solaris continued, "Not death as Zephyros chose, but completion. I want to pass my knowledge to younger Eterni and then step aside to let them build something new. I want to experience the satisfaction of a finished existence." This concept of retirement or graduation spread through Eterni society. Immortal beings began choosing to end phases of their existence not through death, but through deliberate transition. They learned to say goodbye to old selves so they could become new ones. The humans watched these changes with wonder. Elena worked with Eterni philosophers to develop new concepts of time, meaning, and purpose that could work for immortal beings. They created rituals for endings that didn't require death, ceremonies for completing projects, changing relationships, and transitioning between life phases. "You've taught us that immortality doesn't have to mean stagnation," Chrysalis told Elena during one of their conversations. "We can choose to grow and change even if we can't choose to die." The transformation wasn't without resistance. Ancient Pyrrhion and some of the oldest Eterni struggled to accept these new ways of thinking. They had achieved perfect stability over millions of years, and change felt like chaos to them. But even Pyrrhion was eventually moved by what he witnessed. When he saw young Eterni creating beauty with newfound urgency, forming deep friendships with genuine emotional investment, and finding joy in completion and new beginnings, he began to understand what humanity had offered his people. "You have not taught us how to die," he finally admitted to Elena. "You have taught us how to live. For millions of years we merely existed. We maintained ourselves without growing, preserved ourselves without changing, continued ourselves without progressing. You showed us that existence without growth is not life at all." The human colony, no longer threatened with exile, flourished alongside their Eterni neighbors. The two species learned from each other in ways that benefited both. Humans gained access to crystalline technology and immortal wisdom, while the Eterni discovered urgency, passion, and the beauty of meaningful endings. Emma Chen, now a leader in the colony, established the first interspecies school where human children and young Eterni learned together. She taught both species about courage, sacrifice, and the importance of making every moment count. "My mother would be amazed to see this," Emma told Elena as they watched human children playing with young crystal beings in the schoolyard. "She died to help build this colony, but I don't think she ever imagined it would become a place where immortals and mortals could teach each other about the meaning of existence." Elena smiled, thinking about all the goodbyes she had witnessed and facilitated over the years. "Every ending is also a beginning. Your mother's death was the beginning of everything we've built here. The memorial garden where Sarah Chen and Dr. Rivera were buried became a sacred place for both species. Eterni would come to meditate on mortality and meaning, while humans continued to find comfort in remembering their loved ones. The garden grew to include memorial crystals for Zephyros and other Eterni, who had chosen various forms of completion. But perhaps the most beautiful change was in how the Eterni learned to form relationships. Instead of shallow, eternal connections, they began to love deeply and completely, knowing that even immortal relationships could choose meaningful endings. They learned that saying goodbye didn't diminish love. It concentrated it, purified it, made it more precious. Years later, as Elena grew old and her own mortality approached, she was surrounded by friends from both species. The Eterni had learned to grieve, to celebrate completed lives, and to find meaning in temporary connections. "Are you afraid?" asked Chrysalis, her form shimmering with the deep affection she had learned to feel for mortal friends. Elena looked around at the faces, human and crystal, of those she loved. "No," she said. "I'm grateful. I've lived to see two species learn from each other. I've watched immortals discover the beauty of endings and mortals gain appreciation for continuity. My life has been complete. When Elena died, both humans and Eterni attended her memorial service. But it wasn't a service of mourning alone. It was a celebration of transformation, of growth, of the incredible gift that humanity had given to an ancient immortal race. Ancient Pyrrhion spoke at the ceremony, his words carrying the weight of 5 million years of existence. The humans came to our world as refugees seeking shelter. We saw them as flawed beings in need of repair, but they were teachers and we were the ending existence itself.